Hey guys, Zack fucking Snyder. Hey guys. Oh wait, before we go into this discussion, I have these 3 hats. Sorry, I found in my office. They're the hats I made for the crew. They're just crew hats from the movie, so I was just gonna cut them out to you guys. Alright, sorry, thank you guys. Those were cluttering my office. That's the hat I, by the way, wear every day, so it's my, whatever. Anyway.
I love it.
What do you want to, so we're going to talk about the movie a little bit.
Zack, my name's Adam. I'm a longtime friend and collaborator with the Stone Quarter team. I was one of the architects of the world building kind of behind us, and Zack, Wes, and Debbie were kind of to actually come here and get really nerdy. So
let's get nerdy. Also, Adam, probably if you have any of the t-shirts we bought ever or made, Adam probably designed it, so that's just how far Adam is in the Snyder machine. Really good, really incredible. He also tattooed this on my arm. Tattoo that says Deborah. He tattooed it.
Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, on Dawn of the Dead. At lunch on Dawn of the Dead. There we go. He tattooed that on me. So that's been a while.
Well, Zack, congratulations. You have all 4 films are finally out there in the world. What's it like to be Zack Snyder now?
Well, I'll just say that it's really, look, it was a long road, and I mean, we talked a little bit about this one at the intro. That was 6 hours ago, but 7 actually. But it is good. It's really incredible to have the movies out. And the thing that's interesting, really, from my perspective, is that, you know, this is the movie that I wrote. This is the movie. Now that you guys have seen sort of just what I really, the sort of real, like, intent of the sort of world building and the myth building and sort of the sort of ethos of what the movies were kind of about, and there's so many influences. I mean, really, in the end, I think the real hardcore kind of why of the movie was, you know, sort of the transcendent part, the part that's not Star Wars, is really the sort of heavy metal, like, part of the movie. Like, I really feel like when you think about a live action heavy metal movie, that's really kind of what you got. Like, that's what we wanted to do, and I really feel like that's kind of, we got pretty close to it.
Zack Snyder saving us from the sea of sameness that's being impressed upon us. I'm going to say, right? You are an artist of the highest order, in my opinion, and it's just amazing to see how intuitively you work and you put your visions out there. And I think that's just becoming more and more important, you know, as we experience what we're experiencing. So, just want to say thank you. Fucking amazing.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so talking about the film. So in these 2 movies, we saw a shift. I mean, first off, from your titles, from Child of Fire to Chalice of Blood, and Scaregiver to Curse of Forgiveness. I feel like the center of this film moved a little bit. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I feel like I wanted to frame the movies in a slightly different way, you know, with the PG-13 versions of the movie, which I felt like, you know, really were about sort of appealing to a broader audience. I think that these movies really, what I wanted you to do is like, okay, we're gonna go, I'm gonna say, all right, take my hand, we're gonna go on a little bit of a journey. And so I just felt like the framing mechanism of those 2 titles, the new titles, were a lot more sort of in the weeds with the mythology and with the sort of world building that we had endeavored to create. And so I just felt, you know, like people that were into the ride would understand the new naming convention was about a lot of the kind of new attitude, I guess, of these movies.
And we had a shift in that character focus as well, too, right? I remember you talking about that we're kind of going from a Korra-centric story slightly over to an Issa-centric story. And, you know, that the tone of things changed. And I would say, you know, that amazing poster, you know, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. Sort of, you know, moving over to Issa and the Issa myth, you know, and all the lore of Mother World there, right? Like, I mean, we had the wolf and the shimmering skyworm wrapping themselves around her, and all of our symbol sets there. Like, it was a shift.
Yeah, and I think that the important thing, you know, when you have that, because like the Issa story really, when you look at the kind of the giant long look that we were creating with these movies, if there were like 6 movies, you know, another whatever, you know, 4 or 5 movies beyond this, you know, it really becomes a very Issa-centric thing, and Korra really becomes a servant to this sort of Godhead concept, and I think that's really, you know, for me and for sort of the giant myth that is Rebel Moon, and that was really important. You know, that we start really establishing the sort of the gods of the world and understand that what their importance are and how they're going to come back and everything they're going to do.
Yeah, I'm going to say that. You know, you're really a filmmaker and just a maker in general who just really believes in what they make and believes in their worlds, and so it's contagious, and it makes me believe in your fans believe in that. And I remember when I was first tasked to kind of come up with the project, and after I read the script, and I don't think this is unique to this movie, but I mean it's really particular in this movie, is that, you know, you create a universe that has consequences. And I think that that's really interesting, is that, you know, your universe is not neutral, that it sort of inclines towards redemption, you know, if your heroes sort of have the courage enough to kind of act and make it happen, but it sort of wants that to happen. Like there's a good, underneath all this amazing fucking heavy metal, you know, craziness and this madness, there's an ember of good inside all of that darkness, and I think it really resonates with me in particular. I think your fans as well.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of mythic core of everything, is that I mean, for me anyway, the why of it is that there is this universal sort of truth that, you know, and well said through all the heavy metal insanity, you know, you can with some sort of laser focus find this kind of burning ember at the heart of it, and you can warm your hands on that righteousness if you are of the correct iron metal, that you can get to it. And I think that's really what, you know, I think all the great myths, all the Joseph Campbellian kind of hero's journeys, and we can talk about it forever, but that really at its core is what it's all about, is like, you know, they get their boons and they bring them back to us, and we're better because of it. I hope, I mean, maybe, and I think that, you know, I do believe that there's I love the hopeful part of it, you know, I am a believer in the, you know, I mean, I don't want to say the happy ending necessarily, because I'm not always a happy ending guy, but I do think that, like, on a long enough timeline, there's going to be a happy ending, you know what I mean? Like, and it might be fleeting, but it would be there's a moment where we can kind of be redeemed. I believe in that redemption sort of story. I like that.
Yeah, and I love that your characters believe it or learn to believe it as well, too, right? And the path there isn't about belief, but it's by action. And I think that's just, you know, an epic action at that, right? I mean, I think that's just awesome.
Yeah, it's like trial through fire, you know, like they have to, like, there's a crucible of blood and fire, and they come out the other side. Hopefully they're better, or they believe at least, you know. Yeah. Maybe they haven't achieved it, but they think they see a way, you know.
And Mother World itself, sort of like, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but sort of like, you know, does its best to sort of get around those consequences, like acts, like it's a might makes right civilization, right? And the crimes and the sins it's created against the universe sort of have a response, right? Sort of create the circumstances in which in Esau, you know, not just this, but in Esau will arrive and redeem the universe. Right?
Yeah, because otherwise there's no, you know, kind of on that note, you know, the idea of myth in general, like this concept of myth, requires the sanity of the universe has to create an Issa. Almost, otherwise it's pure chaos, and there's no nothing, there's no redemption or anything. So to my to my myth-making mind, the crimes of the mother world always will be answered by M.A.A.C at some point, you know. So that's just cool. That's just cool.
Yeah, and you had said chaos, and just because we're getting deep in this, it was something that was always in the back of my mind, of that there's a sort of a struggle of law and chaos. I mean, got my Michael Moore on, you know, and it just sort of like, it seemed to rhyme with that in a lot of really interesting ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, like, you know, the story of the mother world, you know, in the end, is they have this pretend order that they superimpose over every single thing that they come across, you know. And I think that this sort of make-believe version of their world, that they want to make everything them, no matter where they go. And I think that's this kind, but it's kind of a bullshit version of order. But in the end, you know, if our heroes have the mettle, they can rise beyond that and sort of reorder it. You know, that's what Aece's kind of job would be eventually.
I love that. Yeah, that sort of unification by force. You know, that they're smothering and make it small and simplify, right? And even that was sort of behind the design of the alphabet, and right, and their symbol sets about making things geometric, simplifying the language down to as few characters as possible while maintaining English. You know, that sort of thing. Kind of, again, just crushing things down and to control it, like that sort of.
Yeah, Adam designed the all the fonts for the Mother World, and when we were talking about what they should be, we had a lot of these conversations about, like, make sure, because there's an ancient version of the sort of Imperium writing, which is like a little more scripty, a little more beautiful and elongated. But then as we get closer to this version of the Mother World's forces, they get more and more like simplified and boxy and like more. They're trying to make order out of chaos, and you know, and the script kind of tells that story. So it's really, we tried to do that in every way. Like when we were working on the movie, like all aspects of design, whether it be the costumes or even the sets and everything, you know, we would always have these philosophical conversations about, like, can we superimpose another story on top of the design story that you see, sort of the aesthetic simplicity of what, you know, okay, the guy's got to dress like this in order to, like, you know, we can't have him naked, you know, you start there. And I think that, like, you know, but then you say, like, oh, this would be a cool uniform. And then, like, you say, okay, but now that we have a cool uniform, how do you deconstruct it and superimpose onto it these kinds of little stories so that every little design element of the movie tells a greater story about, like, the world, you know? And I think that was fun. For me, it was super fun to kind of do that because when you're creating something like this from scratch and you don't get anything for free, you know, like there's no location that you can go shoot at. You always, now you have to think about all those things all the time, you know, as far as, you know, what does this say? What does that mean? You know, and that's a fun part of making the movie.
All right, let's zoom out here a little. You had talked. This is not the difference between these 4 films. It's not just bonus material. I mean, you have different selections there are different assemblies, different shots, different color, right?
Different color, yeah.
Yeah. And you had said to me, and I found this incredibly interesting, is that there's slightly different stories, and that led to a conversation about what happened over time.
Yeah, we were saying that, like, for instance, if we made more movies, that the R-rated version of this universe would start to separate from the PG-13 version of this universe even greater than it does in this version of the movie. Because if you think about, like, even the timelines within the context of the movies are different, you know, like they find the scout ship sort of at a different time, like everything is slightly different. And even the characters themselves, you could argue, sort of have different experiences, or we understand them differently. And so I think that you know, over time would make itself, it would compound itself over time and really start to sort of separate the two universes. So that's a fun thought experiment that we could probably spend a couple of weeks talking about, but we don't have to. That's cool.
And maybe sort of getting into some of the particulars here. We had talked about Esau and sort of this thrice-born redeemer. I think it was a phrase that we had used in the past. And we see sort of glimpses of previous incarnations in the backgrounds of some of these, in some of the scenes in here. And I don't want to talk too much about that, but it's kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, there's that cool painting where she's blowing the giants up, because we have there's this whole mythic battle that happened sort of in an ancient time on the Mother World, where there are giants that walked the planet, I guess is the Earth, you want to say, but it's not really the Earth. I guess it's Earth. Anyway, and so Issa was called into this, Issa was born and sort of came into her powers during this huge struggle, and that was one of the myths that we've talked about, is where she blew those giants up. Because you can imagine that the Collies would eventually, if they were to free themselves from all the dreadnoughts, because every dreadnought then probably has a Collie in its engine room that, if given the right circumstances, could be released, and those same goddesses, if they were walking the earth, would be formidable in a conflict, I think. So that could be a cool because and then even if you look at the sequence where they're in the garden and Belisarius and Cora are talking, Archelaus, I guess at that point, are talking about killing the princess. If you look closely, there's all these giant skeletons in the ground all around in the field. So through some zombie magic, they could be resurrected, and we could have a skeleton versus Collie battle at some point.
Well, since you mentioned the Collie, let's talk about the root Collie a little bit, and the crimes against the universe, or the divine order that oversees the universe, or whatever we're calling it. One thing I always found really provocative is when you describe the Collies to me for the first time, and the metaphor that arose from that of literally we have these giant women, these atomic Valkyries that are from this higher dimensional order that through trickery, right, are pulled into our prime material realm, and sort of their bodies are bound and then used to fuel the war machine. There's just, again, this is sort of one of those glimpses that I think, these glimpses that you have and sort of bring it to the surface, and it's holy shit, that's fucking genius, right?
And it's fun too, because the idea that the Collies, we were, to me, it was I was imagining okay, so the Imperium sort of ran up against their ability to sort of, there's a huge problem with resources that, to conquest space, they were using up all the natural resources of Toa, and pretty much or Moa, sorry, of Moa, and pretty much had were exhausting their own world. And so the high priests of their world had divined this other dimension, and literally there's this animated film that we've been working on. I don't know if we're going to make it 100%, but we're working on it. But it tells the story of this kind of what I would say is a sort of humble a fool. Yeah, and a guy who works at the DMV, basically, who discovers who is the patsy that gets sent sort of dimensionally to find these Collies. And I think the idea, to me, was that what seems like a discovery through chance or circumstance turns out to be this very carefully calculated event that the priests, the Ministry of Information has created to like get the colonies, because the idea is like once they've captured the colonies, they have this sort of infinite resource that can jump them, you know, not only is it this massive power source, but can also fold space and make them be able to travel and conquer galaxies rather than just their little star system. So that was really a massive move for them. But inside of all of them now is these it's like Trojan horses that they've created. You know, it's been, you know, 1,000 years and they forgot that, you know, it's like Samson. It's like the Samson story in some ways. Like now they just see the Collies as like an engine. They've forgotten that they're like actual goddesses inside those shells. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, and Motherworld itself, I mean, this is sort of a reoccurring theme with them, right? Like in the sense that they make these technological jumps, you know, that instead of improving their lives, they make them more desperate for resources, because it's like their hunger devours them, right? And this is just, you know, a great example of that. You know, and then I guess one of the things about that too is that, you know, here we have this crime again against the universe, and then the universe responds, you know, 1,000 years later. I mean, universal time is large, you know.
Yeah, and also for a goddess, you can imagine that like 1,000 years is not a big deal. You know, it's not a, you know, generations of Motherworld soldiers sort of just really solidifying their philosophical point of view in regard to the Collies makes it even more ironic and ridiculous eventuality, you know, in their own demise. So that's a cool two locomotives running toward each other in this universe.
And then they decide to kill the Redeemer, right? Like,
and they kill the Redeemer. Yeah.
Now they're off the map. You know what I mean? Like, I think this is you know, the Imperium is sort of, they're off the rails. There's no, everything's crumbling around them. I mean, this is sort of it.
Although it seems like, I think to Belisarius, the idea of killing the princess seems like a really great idea, and feels like the only way forward. And I think that's a cool and incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah, the logic is sound.
The logic is sound, but like, you know, sort of in a cosmic sense, it's like obviously you just put a gun to your own head, and that's exactly what it is.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about Toa, the first 20 minutes of the director's cut.
Sure.
You know, one it sort of rhymes with this idea, you know, that this might makes right. It's so Roman and biblical, right? And it feels like end times, and just based on what we were just talking about, not only end times for Toa, but also, you know, a civilization that does this to other civilizations can't last. You know, that this is like they're turning the universe into a literal hellscape. And this is the first scene where we meet the priests and the teeth.
Yeah, we get more teeth in this movie. Obviously, I have some sort of dental obsession. The soul is in the teeth, you know. Could be. We don't know. But it's a cool metaphor. You know, for like snatching something, like taking a prize, you know, from, it just seemed cool. I don't know why. I was like, maybe there's like a picture frame with thousands of teeth on it, and whoever they kill, they like take the tooth and they put it in. It's like mosaic. But does that sound cool? I don't know. Yeah, that's like when this is what it sounds like.
Well, I think it really provokes some interesting ideas, and I think, you know, although the teeth, you might say, is more symbolic or ritualistic, you know, we do have a scene where Noble orders after killing, what are the guy's names from Providence, right? That they get the information out of him after they kill him. To dissect his brain.
Dissect his brain, yeah.
Right? So we have that, and we'll touch here in a minute. We'll talk more about Oracle Steel in a minute, but we have this idea that, and I'm going to even throw like sort of a bloodline as well into this, is that substance, especially biological substance, is not only in principle, but holds memory or certain kinds of information that is indeed extractable.
Sure.
Right? That is.
I mean, look, we always, at best, when you teeter on at the edge of magic, like when you have, it's cool, like, with a sci-fi movie like this, and especially something that's like slightly, comes from like a heavy metal universe, you want always, for me, like you want always like this idea of magic and this idea of sci-fi to be like, braided together, because and when I say magic, I just mean things that like are inexplicable, right? So the idea of sci-fi is like everything's explainable. And the idea of like this magic thing is like, oh no, you can't understand this. So like trying to understand it is a folly. And I think that to me is really the fun of a universe like this, because you'll always have this larger mythological thing that will come in to trump everything that you've kind of designed, which is, and I think that to me the teeth also, it's a gruesome and because it's industrialized by the Mother World's army, it also shows at what level the sort of barbarism has risen to, I think and also the sadness of Issa's portrait, right? So you can imagine that what happens, like Issa died, and they were like, oh, we loved Issa, even though we killed her. We love Issa, we think she's amazing, to justify our barbarism, we're doing this in the name of like slain child. And so that makes it cooler, for them.
It's cynicism at the highest order.
Yeah, it's really
right?
sad. It's really coolly, ridiculously bad.
Well, so getting at these enigmas here, and I'm going to put two on the table here that really blew my mind, and it took me a moment to wrap my head around them. One was, while we're talking about Issa and the portrait, is the idea that glass plate photography has a place in your science fiction or science fantasy universe. And it took me a moment to wrap my head around it, and I fucking love it. Like, it's just, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's more that Steve Berkman has a place in my science sci universe, probably. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, not kidding, but I just thought, there's something also that, Steve, I don't know, Steve, are you here? He was here earlier. Anyway, Steve took those photos, and he took the Wonder Woman photo in BBS, and he's awesome. And he has this amazing book, amazing books. He's an amazing artist. You can go buy all of his stuff because he's awesome. But what happens is, like in that photo of Issa, it requires a super long exposure, right? In order to take a photograph depending on the light, but like in this case, it was a super long. I think it was like a 2-minute exposure. I know he's not here. Anyway, it was like a 2-minute exposure, and so like they put these like little calipers on your head, and you have to like sit super still, and she gets this like, your eyes kind of get this dead look in them, and I just thought that way of portraiture was like going to be really interesting for this process, that it's not like a normal photograph. Like it's neither like a sci-fi, like weird, like you can imagine that we could have done some sort of Blade Runner, like moving photo, which is cool, but like, it's kind of like a weird little if it's like alive. Or we could have done a painting, which also, okay, so there's paintings, I guess, then we have paintings. Or I was like, this kind of glass photography is kind of weirdly in between. It's like another, like we don't take photography on glass, except for Steve. You know what I mean? And so it renders this kind of otherworldly quality that is like really incredible. And so, so that was how I kind of justified it in my mind. And the image is exactly what I wanted, so it was perfect.
I remember when I was watching him take that photograph, just the notion of the king's gaze, right? We have this thing, and now we have this like cyclopean instrument photographing the king, who's the source of that gaze. There was sort of a really interesting moment there.
That's fun.
So the other thing, I said I had two things. The other thing was space coal. And
Oh, space coal, yeah, which obviously is not coal. I do recall that there were some people that were mad at the PG-13 movies because they were saying that how can these ships run on coal? And I say, you're right, that is a good question. What's better is they run on this sort of mushed up bodies of our conquered enemies that we feed to this giant goddess who eats them and spits out energy. So that's better than coal, I guess.
Zack Snyder.